Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Now, as we've covered this Oregon standoff with some of the Bundys who are at the Bundy Ranch standoff that I covered, I've tried to make it clear that while I admire Ammon Bundy and his brothers, I believe they're making a severe tactical error with this standoff. And we're going to talk about the Constitutional Convention because I admire Governor Abbott, but in the same way, I believe that he's making a severe tactical error by calling for a Constitutional Convention. First, what's going on at the Bundy Ranch? Is there a better way to achieve this? Yes, I think so. We saw an article that the New York Times put out that's linked by Drudge, the larger but quieter than Bundy pushed to take over federal land. Not necessarily to take it over. Let's understand, this is the people's land. It should have been turned over to them when these areas became states. That's the whole point. And of course, instead of talking about the Bundy Ranch, the Bundy, Oregon standoff at this point, they talk about Ken Ivory, somebody that we have interviewed here on Infowars. Alex has talked to him and his organization, the American Lands Council. They say it's been funded mostly by donations from county governments. Why is that? It's because of the oppressiveness of the federal government, and they lay some of this out. Understand also that in Utah, where Ken Ivory is a legislator, the governor there back in 2012 signed a bill asking for the federal government to do the constitutional rightful thing, and that is to turn over those lands to state management. But of course, the federal government just ignored that. Now, the New York Times article makes some interesting cases here, things that don't have anything to do necessarily with grazing rights or mineral rights that are hard for people in suburban and city areas to understand. It talks about things like access to the national parks. That you can understand. Here's an example. In December, Phil Lyman, a commissioner in San Juan County, Utah, received a 10-day jail sentence after he led a protest ride on all-terrain vehicles through a federal area that had been closed to motorized use. He said, all I did was drive down a canyon road, He said, it seems to be getting worse. The federal agencies are expanding. The restraints are being overstepped. It's not the way this country was set up. It's not the founder's design. Here's another example. They say about an hour's ride from the wildlife refuge where Mr. Bundy's group is facing off with the government. Erin Maupin and her husband, Jeff, pay the government each summer to feed their cattle on 19,000 acres of federally owned land. She said that like many ranchers, they wanted to work with the government, but the layers of grazing restrictions and environmental rules were getting out of hand. She said, we want somebody to make sure we're doing it right, but it's gotten to the point where there's no common sense in it. That's the point. There's no common sense in it. They are just shutting the areas down. And of course, as we reported last week, the congressman from the area where the Bundys are occupying that facility in Oregon had talked about how the federal government tried to shut down access for runners. They had a runners trail there where they had about 20 people at a time going with youth groups that were going out there, Boy Scout groups, that sort of thing. They tried to shut that down. And they had to fight them to keep them from shutting it down to foot traffic or to keep them from shutting down canyon roads as this protest came about. But here's the bottom line, and they understand they're starting to see what is happening now, although they may not see the roots of this action. They say the land policies now are basically lock it up and throw away the key, said a commissioner in Garfield County, Utah. He says it's land with no use. The local economy has really suffered as a result. Yeah, they're making everybody poor. Grazing has been reduced. We used to have a thriving timber industry. That is all but gone. And see, this is by design. This is Agenda 21. This is the 2030 sustainability plan. You have to understand that that is the plan to lock this all up. So how do we control the government? Well, last week we had the Texas governor here took on the challenge, and I agree with him as to what the problem is, and I agree with the fact that he's taking action. We still need to take a look at that action, though, even though we like Governor Abbott, even though I support what he's done, even though I appreciate the fact that he's taking action, we still need to look at what that action is. And of course, here in Texas, in the Red River Valley, the BLM is trying to take away private property, saying that literally redrawing the boundaries. Property that has been deeded to these families for decades, in many cases over 100 years, taking away, I think it's over 150,000 acres. I'm just going from memory on that. So what do? Well, the governor says Congress is unable to control itself, so the people must impose control. I would say this: Congress is unable or unwilling to control the bureaucracy, the courts, and the president. See, the Congress has become a rump organization. They have invited this dictatorial government, this unilateral push for all this. The Congress is doing absolutely nothing. And so the solution does have to come from the states. As Governor Abbott said, the states must lead the way. I would say the people have to lead the way. And part of that is going to be working with the states. And understand, too, that it's, just as I said about Governor Abbott, we don't fall in line necessarily on a constitutional convention because he proposes it. Understand, 2 days before Governor Abbott proposed it, we had Marco Rubio propose a constitutional convention. And he said all of the right things. He said, we want to promote a convention of states to amend the Constitution and restore limited government because the government is out of control. He said, the framers of our Constitution allowed for a constitutional convention because they knew our citizens were the ultimate defense against an overbearing federal government, okay? And he says, this is necessary because Washington's refusal to place restrictions on itself. Now, I would ask you, when he says, we knew that our citizens would be the ultimate defense, who is going to be going to this constitutional convention? Will it be you and I? Or will it be people like Marco Rubio, like John Boehner, like Nancy Pelosi, like Harry Reid? Even though he's retiring now, there'll be somebody like him. It will be the leadership of the mainstream parties that will be going there to amend our Constitution. And that's my first concern about it, one of my key concerns about it. But I also believe that there are many things that we can do that don't have the risk of a constitutional convention that would involve us directly, things that we could do directly. Let's take a look at some of the things, however, that Governor Abbott has proposed in his detailed plan, Restoring the Rule of Law. Prohibit Congress from regulating activity that occurs wholly within one state. Well, I would argue that under the Constitution, they don't have the authority to do that. They have appealed to the Commerce Clause. They've appealed to the General Welfare Clause. Understand that I think those arguments are very specious, even if they were true. They're still superseded by the 9th and 10th Amendment that make it clear that unless they have been given express authority in a particular area, they don't have it. Understand that this kind of intervention within the state boundaries came about during the FDR regime when they were trying to regulate food and control farmers' prices, and you had a farmer who said, I'm only selling within my state. They said, we don't care. You're affecting it all the way across state lines. So it's been the executive branch in conjunction with the judiciary, as FDR packed the courts, that has overthrown the rule of law. When we take a look at this, the story that I had earlier about the lady who was going around robbing banks, did anybody say, you know what we really need is we need to make it more clear that it's against the law to do armed robbery? Or maybe she didn't understand that armed robbery prohibition doesn't applies to a jewelry store. So maybe we should have one expressly saying that you're not supposed to rob jewelry stores. See, the problem is not the law. The problem is the criminals who refuse to obey the law. And I don't want to see this gang of criminals rewriting our laws. The problem is we have to get them to obey it. Another example, require Congress to balance the budget. I agree with that as well. However, understand that the root cause of that is the Federal Reserve, the Keynesian crutch that says that money that we owe to ourselves is not anything that we have to worry about. That's the lie that was sold with the Keynesian economists. We need to attack the Federal Reserve. We got really only Ron Paul talking about that. He's pressing Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders to put up or shut up. You want to complain about the banks that control everybody, but you won't sign on to the Audit the Fed bill? See, it's the same thing that we're seeing from the Democrats when we've got Paul Ryan saying that he wants to now defund Obamacare and he wants to defund Planned Parenthood 3 weeks after he gave carte blanche to the funding for these organizations with the omnibus bill. Remember? He put all that funding in there. He even removed the Cadillac tax to help the Democrats to sell Obamacare as a victory, because that would have punished blue-collar working class people for having Cadillac health insurance plans that were negotiated through their unions. They would have had to pay a higher tax. So they helped them out on that. That's the problem we have, is a government that will not obey the law. It isn't a problem that we don't have clear enough laws. But understand that what makes the federal government irresponsible is the fact that they can print money, that they can borrow money without any limit with using the Federal Reserve. States don't have that capability. As a governor, Governor Abbott understands that. But of course, it was John Maynard Keynes, creator of Keynesian economics, the court jester to FDR's economic programs, that sold us on the lie that macroeconomics doesn't obey the same rules as microeconomics, that no matter how much money you borrow, if you borrow it from yourself, it doesn't really matter. And yet the reality is that we're not borrowing it from ourselves. We're printing it, we're borrowing it from other countries. That is the fundamental lie, and the Federal Reserve is really the mechanism by which they've done this. No budget balancing amendment is really going to stop that. See, we can't really restate the 9th and 10th Amendment as his 7th one does. He says, restore the balance of power between the federal and state governments by limiting the federal government to powers expressly delegated it into the Constitution. Well, that's the 9th and 10th Amendment. Are we going to put that back in there and say, and oh, by the way, this time we really mean it? See, the Constitution and any of these amendments are not self-enforcing documents. So we have to have the courage to stand up and do something about that. We have to understand that most of these proposals that he has here, he's pointing out that the bureaucracies and the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, are out of control, unaccountable, unelected by the American people. So we have to find some way to restore that. And his prescription, most of these amendments, would be to have a 2/3 majority of the states to override what the bureaucracies are doing, what the Supreme Court is doing, what activist federal courts are doing. I would say this: we have a tool where one juror can override this on a case-by-case basis. We need to understand that we have powers that we're not even using. And that's a problem of ignorance of the American people. We need to have situations where we require the judges to inform the jurors of both their rights and the duties. They need to know what the prospective penalties are going to be if they find somebody guilty. So that's the situation that was behind Oregon. It wasn't just an out-of-control bureaucracy, but it was a jury that wrongfully convicted these people because they didn't know what the penalties were going to be, because they were told they could only judge the facts and not how the law was going to be applied. We had a judge there who revolted against the obscenity of this mandatory minimum, calling these people arsonists and terrorists. He said, it offends my conscience, and yet it was overturned because of mandatory minimum. So we need to get rid of that. We need to require judges to tell the truth. We need to have honesty when we select the juries. We need to reclaim due process. You see, we have a situation now, we have a court system that really operates without justice, without mercy, without due process. We have the fiction that when the government punishes you by stealing your property, they can call it a civil action and not a criminal action. No, civil action is what happens when two citizens sue each other in court. A criminal action is when the government comes after you with penalties. So we need to remove those lies. But before we can, we need to look at some of the fundamental lies that are standing right in front of us, like the war on drugs, for example. And we had Debbie Wasserman Schultz called out for that, said, you know, why are you still supporting marijuana prohibition of all things? And she said, well, you know, I do it for safety. We have to understand that at the time we had the Alcohol Prohibition Amendment, everybody understood the federal government had no authority. They knew what the Constitution was about. That's why we have those two amendments, to make it illegal and to make it legal again. We have to restore respect and understanding of what the rule of law is. So we don't have a Constitution problem. We have a problem with criminals in Washington. Well, that's it for tonight's news. If you're not a Prison Planet TV subscriber, please consider supporting our operation. It's one way that you can help us to continue. And right now we have half off. If you get a 1-year subscription, you get 6 months for free. That's only about 10 cents a day. Well, join us again tomorrow. We'll be back at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for the nightly news.
Clean, pure drinking water. You can't survive without it. But where do you get it? Alexa Pure Pro is a brand new, groundbreaking, gravity-fed water filtration system that is like no other. The Alexa Pure Pro transforms water from virtually any fresh source into clean, healthy drinking water, pairing the unprecedented superfiltration power of an all-new gravity block core with a hybrid chromatic shell. It removes up to 99.999% of impurities, including bacteria, viruses, fluoride, disinfectants, volatile organic contaminants, and hormones. Filter capacity up to 5,000 gallons. Stainless steel construction. Easy assembly. Low maintenance. Replacement filters are simple to install. And now, as part of an exclusive limited time introductory offer, you can save $20 off the retail price and get free shipping. This is a limited time offer, so order your unit today and receive free shipping and $20 off. Go to InfoWarsStore.com or call 888-253-3139.